Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to inform you about a presentation I went to last night. Jim Jones, which is an ex-Idaho Supreme Court justice, spoke in Twin Falls last night at the Herritt Center in support of refugees. Apparently, he was a 1982 Idaho Attorney General, and he's considered the mastermind in returning control of Idaho water back to Idaho. That is awesome. He seems like he's very well respected, very well liked. But I wanted to be able to share with you the notes in case you didn't get to go. I did record the event, so I do have timelines associated with those. So if the recording gets out there, I can give you the timelines where he actually talks about certain things that he talks about. So he talked, and he made a very emotional appeal, a leftist type of an emotional appeal about his history, where he came from, his involvement with refugees as he traveled around the world, and with the Chinese and the Vietnamese and the Irish and the Chinese and all of these things, and seeing all of the turmoil that was going on in the country for as long as it has. He basically started at 7 minutes and 30 seconds about, and he was an attorney too, offering free legal services to refugees. I should say pro bono. I guess he's well within his right to do that. My question is, if we're Americans and all laws apply to all people, then how is it that the average American ends up getting extorted when they go into the court system? At 11:20, he says, our nation actually sets the standards for morality and the example. Now, we have to remember here, he's an Idaho Supreme Court justice, sworn oath to the Constitution, and so most of the things that I'll be discussing is the constitutionality of the things that he should be doing. Now, I don't understand the fact that there's this conception that our nation sets the standard for morality and example. I think that there's a certain degree of that is true in the fact that we led by example. We didn't infiltrate and force people to be moral. It's a lot like what government's trying to do with us today. So I was a little bit concerned about that. Automatically, by the crowd he drew, I knew what kind of people I was going to be sitting with or sitting around. The lady in front of me, because of the question that I asked related to the United Nations, she turned around and she said, "You're not going to key my car, are you?" ? And I looked at her and I said, "You're one of those people that I bet really doesn't like to offend people, huh?" And I said, "I don't really care that you offended me. I just want you to know I was offended." And she looked back and she said, "I wasn't talking to you." And I said, "Well, you turned around and you looked right at me." So anyway, Jim said at 11:30 that we are a nation of immigrants. We hear this a lot. Everything in this country was done because of the immigrants, and not all of them were legal, but some of them were undocumented. Now, do you see the way that he used the word legal when it was okay, and then he deviated from that and called them undocumented when they aren't? If you're going to be consistent in the legal field, you should probably use terms that are completely opposite of one another, like legal and illegal, or lawful and unlawful, not legal and undocumented. At minute 13, he starts talking about wonderful employers, about Chobani and the fact that we owe a lot to them. He talked about the new CEO for Micron that actually started SanDisk, was from India. Minute 15, he talks about an Iraqi that had said that the water in Flint, Michigan had lead in it and that it was unhealthy for kids. I guess not unhealthy for parents. Minute 17, we have the best universities, he said. Well, I can obviously tell by the people that were in the crowd, they obviously believe that their money, that they seem to have more of than we do. They really believe that our best and brightest come from our universities. It shows really how detached they are from having their finger on the pulse of current events, understanding the globalist type of an involvement, the conspiracy behind hijacking our education system and brainwashing our children to not only no longer believe in nationalism, but to be able to support globalism and the propagated lie of environmentalism. Let's see, minute 19, he said that the people that come here are not slackers. Well, I would submit to you that that may or that may not be true, but it may also be irrelevant. If they're illegal, illegal means they're breaking the law. And it doesn't matter if they're slackers or not. And I beg to differ in the fact that I don't know that they could actually vet people that aren't slackers. Let's see, minute 21, he said that the Chinese, we imported Chinese railroad workers because the Americans wouldn't work. I think that's, I don't know how truthful that is. 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act actually sent the Chinese back. 1924 was targeting the Jews and the Italians. Minute 24 was 1942. He talked about the sadness of the Japanese internment camp. I can't really argue with him there. Minute 26, we needed to reach out. He says that we need to reach out to the refugees. So we not only need to be able to accept the refugees, we actually have to reach out to them and invite them here. Minute 2650, he did admit straight out that he was a board member of Janus, Inc., Janus, I believe. And a friend had told me that they are a privatized healthcare contractor. But Janus is actually responsible for the refugee program in Idaho. He says he is a member, and I call it a conflict of interest. But being that he's an ex-Supreme Court justice, you can just kind of see where he's at. I mean, you're either constitutional or you're not, or maybe you have one of those brilliant college educations, right? Let's see. Minute 27, he realizes that the refugees want a better life, and that the difference between refugees and undocumented workers is the refugees are typically running from something, and they are typically running from some kind of totalitarian dictatorship or some kind of oppression or whatever, running to America, waiting to be oppressed all over again, I imagine. Basically, let's see, he had minute 34, he expressed tears of sadness on America turning away from those that helped us in all of the wars. He didn't really go into any specifics on that, and if he did, I'd fail to write them down. I am aware of several of those instances. For example, the issue relating to Chiang Kai-shek that apparently wanted to offer the Chinese people a constitutional republic, and America walked away and handed all of our armaments to Mao Zedong, and other instances, I am sure. Minute 35, he had made mention, this is really interesting, from a constitutional Supreme Court justice. He said that there was a claim to take it to the United Nations, and his response was, "Thank God." The interesting thing, though, is in minute 36, he says, we actually cause our refugee problems. And I would tend to agree with that. The question is who is we? Is it America, or is it actually the very entity that he was looking to for help? See, it's part of this. It's part of the Hegelian dialectic, I think, it's called, right? Where the government creates a problem, they create the solution, and then they come in and they look like the savior, right? Well, if the United Nations is destabilizing the rest of the countries, forcing the United Nations to spread democracy in these countries and blowing up buildings and children and separating families, what kind of responsibility does America have when we end up creating the refugees that we create? Now, I tend to agree with that. If we're going to go and explode countries and we're going to blow up and obliterate families, shouldn't America take some kind of responsibility for that? The problem is that America is only a pawn under the United Nations, which has ultimate responsibility, but then the responsibility falls back on America, because we have submitted ourselves under the United Nations. So, he talks about the destabilization of other countries, but yet he doesn't realize that America is $100 trillion in debt. We're falling into chaos. There's never been any mention about the chaos that's going on in France, the chaos that's going on in Germany, and the chaos that's going on anywhere else. And it's all out of feelings. It's all out about loving and feelings and all of those things in abandonment of facts. And it was really interesting because when questions were actually asked, they were denied as fake news or fake statistics, and the fact that the only people that had real news and real statistics were the people in the audience that were in support of Jim. The problem is most of those people are lefty college grads, and they have no understanding, nor do they have the finger on the pulse of any current events, understand anything related to constitutionality and the detriment of this country, nor the conspiratorial elements that are undermining this country. In minute 39, he talks about the Syrians have not been the problem here in this country, which begs the question, maybe others have been. He talked about Idaho, and most of our refugees came from Africa, the Congo, Twin Falls 68%, Boise 51%, and 35% from South Asia, Burma, and Myanmar, I think, talking about their horrible situations. The question that kept coming up in my own mind is, are we the world's savior? Should the government be able to extort all of the American tax dollars to save the rest of the world? And is that not the definition of globalism? And where is the protective element of our nation? And if our nation is no longer our nation, then how will we continue to be able to help other nations when we become like those other nations, which we are, which people still live in denial about? So minute 42, pro bono work, he says that the Boise Police Department is actually going to teach classes to the refugees about not fearing police and saying that government is here to help. The first program, I believe, he said, will be at the Boise Library. I didn't catch the date on that, and I think he did say that. Minute 50, he talked about the NRA and some human rights issue that ended up passing, and that Jim worked on the Aryan Nations issue. I didn't really take much more specifics than that. 5145, while nationalists, he called white nationalists renegades, and that we need to treat the minorities fairly. And he says that we should all come to the realization that that type of thing does not speak about us, for us. Minute 52:42, refugees do not deserve harassment, but the American people do. So it was a pretty short presentation, and some of the questions that were going on in my mind is Jim making any money on these grants or salaries or contracts on any aspect of the refugee resettlement? I think that's a legitimate question, and I never got to ask that. The next question is, what about the value and the importance of assimilation? Shouldn't they learn how to read, write, understand the English language? Shouldn't they understand our form of government, understand why it's different than other forms of government? Understand that they need to abandon any foreign allegiance to any form of government or dictatorship, that they shouldn't be an adulterer or a fornicator, and have two witnesses to that fact, citing the Walter McCarran Act of 1964, I think. I mean, if Congress gets to set the rules for nationalization and they don't pay attention to the rules, why should the American citizens listen to the federal government or the state governments? I mean, isn't that the recipe for chaos when the government steps outside the rule of law? When the Constitution was created as a government limiting document and not a people limiting document. Let's see if I can read my chicken scratches. He talked about, I was questioning the videos of Germany and France and why they didn't bother to show the fact that they're in practically civil war or chaos at the very least. And wasn't the war in Iraq that he hated started with the United Nations support? I already mentioned that already. And how much of our tax dollars should actually go towards saving the whole world? And what if we don't consent to that? Isn't it the perfect excuse for the government to be able to rob all of the wealth of all of the taxpayers in this country, fulfilling the dream that Obama said where no nation should ever stand above another nation? Well, they don't want to elevate third world nations to a first world nation. They want to take the first world nation, because we're white, Anglo-Saxon, Germanic, Israelite people, and the average white American doesn't know that, arguably, isn't it amazing that we're hated? We're almost hated as much as God is hated. And isn't it a fact that anything that is absolutely detested over time has always been what is pure and what is righteous? Now, I'm not speaking of supremacy here, but if I am white and there's a war on whites, do I not have a right to be able to defend my position? So how lawful is it to forcefully misappropriate our tax dollars? And the question I got to ask Jim was, what role do you, Janice, or the refugee program have with the United Nations, and what role do you believe that the UN should play in our Constitution? Well, he missed the second part of the question, and I can't blame him, but maybe I tried to shove too much in there, so I can't really blame him for that. But he basically said that the United Nations, I believe he says the United Nations tells them where, divides people up and tells them where they're going to go. And then the United States, I guess, gets to choose how many they're going to have. Well, that flies in contradiction to everything I've read in New American articles about the UN, about Antonio Gutierrez, which is the UNHCR High Commissioner and President or high-ranking official of an organization called Socialist International, which should help open your eyes and connect the dots of that particular issue. Then there was another question about why Christians are persecuted, why so few of them are getting involved, and why we're not accepting more Christians from other countries, and why they're all of Muslim descent. And they just said that that wasn't true. He also said that UN sends representatives to the United States to see how the programs are running. So there's oversight. They picked Idaho as the first stop. The United Nations picked Idaho as the first stop. And he said Idaho Housing works with the refugees, and the UN interviews people to determine where to send them. So we have UN control all over this. Now, I'm going to ask him if he swore an oath to the Constitution, which I'm thinking he probably doesn't do anymore because he's not a judge. So the UN interviews the people and determine when they send them. So there was another question, what about diseases being brought in? And his answer was, well, that's all bogus. If they have diseases, they are treated before they come. And he said that Scandinavia was one of those greatest countries that takes more than anyone. The problem is Scandinavia, or the demographics of Scandinavia, have changed absolutely drastically, and there are stories to the fact that Scandinavia now regrets it. Minute 101, we had the refugee. Let's see, there was a question about refugee cost, and Jim basically said that the costs that were brought forth were inaccurate, fake news, right? Let's see, 1 hour 3:24. He said that other countries are destabilized and we need to help them. So here's the thought. The United States is $100 trillion in debt, arguably. And somehow the average American person doesn't think that that's a big deal. And somehow it thinks that we have money that comes from somewhere, and the fact that we could save the entire world by bringing all of the world's oppressed over here because the Statue of Liberty says so. 1 hour, 4 minutes, 27 seconds. The refugees are just like the people that founded this country. Now think about that for a minute. Now he didn't really go into detail in that, but if he's going to make a statement like that, he has to understand that the refugees that are just like the people that founded this country is only one instance in the fact that they were refugees and they were actually fleeing from the oppression of one nation to another. But they were different in every other aspect, in the fact that they were Christians. They believed in life, liberty, and property. They believe that government should be instituted and to protect those rights and to be limited to those few and defined powers. These people have no concept of what that is. So they're nothing like our founding fathers. 1 hour, 5 minutes, 45. They actually came out, and this was really interesting. They actually came out and said something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing, that those that oppose the refugees should be sent away. Anybody that opposes the refugees should be sent away. And everybody's clapping. And I thought, wow, I really understand the kind of room I'm in right now. 1/6/44. Let's see. The Heritage Foundation on Refugees. Oh, they said they linked that there was somebody in the Heritage Foundation that did an article that said that about the refugees that believes in eugenics. So therefore, we shouldn't trust the Heritage Foundation, but they don't realize that our own government is involved in the eugenics program, or that other countries were involved in eugenics programs as well, or perhaps the new document that I just found, or new to me, that is, the United Nations document on population replacement, which they also did cover. They said, we really need these refugees, whether they're educated or not, because we're not producing enough babies. Well, think about that for a minute. Isn't population control part of the UN agenda? Well, if the UN agenda is going to create something and get people stupid enough to believe that we should kill our own babies so that we can change the whole demographic of our country, what's the United Nations actually doing? Now, this isn't rocket science, is it? So I wanted to leave that, guys, with you and have you and have you see what he's talking about. So let's see, 10832. There is a role for uneducated refugees to replace our population. So he is aware of the United Nations document to pay for our Social Security. That's like using people, isn't it? Well, we just want you here so you can pay for our Social Security. So is it really about them paying our Social Security, or is it really about us helping them? I'm seeing some self-interest here. And they also, when a question was asked about increasing the welfare rolls of the refugees, they shot that down and said that was fake news too. 1 hour, 10 minutes. We need to bring in more people here to help us. And let's see, finally, 11133, the immigrant question has no clue about our republic. So the people in this room have no understanding. They were properly brainwashed through their highest educational college section in this country. They have no clue of our constitutional republic. They have no understanding of the refugees. They have no understanding of differences in religion, the issues relating to how other religions either have a separation between church and state or how they don't. In the name of tolerance, they believe that somehow there should be a separation of church and state, but yet we should allow Muslim refugees to be able to come in, or any other refugee for that matter, to not only assimilate, but to be able to live on the fact that there's no separation between government and their religion. So anyway, that was Jim Jones in Twin Falls, you guys, and I hope you got some benefit out of that. If you need the notes or you need the audio, please let me know, and I'll get that out to you. Thank you.